Good evening, everybody. Just if you don't mind, just wait another minute or two to allow any stragglers to find their way into this new venue for us. So we'll make a start in a few minutes if you just bear with us in the meantime. Thank you. Okay, everybody, welcome to you all to this evening's lecture, the last for this year. Before I introduce our speaker this evening, I have to go through the usual housekeeping bits and bobs. So if you could please make sure that if you've got a mobile phone on you, that it's turned to silent or off, please. Likewise, online, if you can make sure that you are muted. Thank you. We have two fire exits at the top of the lecture theatre where you came in, and another one to my right here. Not expecting any problems, but should the alarms go off for any reason, if you could just make your way as quickly as possible to the grass in front of the Lanyon building. There's a signing in sheet, I think, that's going around. If you could please make sure that you've signed it so we know who's in the building. Right, it's my great pleasure then to introduce our speaker this evening. Anthony is an independent researcher, author, journalist, tour guide, storyteller, photographer, and founder of the Mythical Ireland website. He has a particular interest in the Newgrange landscape. He's been studying the ancient myths and monuments of Ireland and their associated alignments for many years now, and has written several books on the subject, both fiction and non-fiction, and has appeared in various television programmes relating to his research. And during the heat wave of the summer of 2018, Anthony used a drone over the area around Newgrange, revealing traces of previously unknown archaeological features, including the distinct outline of a large henge monument now nicknamed Dronehenge. So I'm delighted to welcome Anthony to talk to us this evening and to tell us what lies beneath. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Anne. Can everybody hear me okay? Lack of response is worrying. Can you hear me up at the back? Great. Thank you, Anne, and indeed Pat, for welcoming me to Ulster Archaeological Society and my first time ever speaking at Queen's University. I have to say I'm very impressed by the facilities. This is quite something. So no need for introductions. Anne has hopefully dealt with that. What follows is a whirlwind tour of the subject, which is what lies beneath the hidden archaeology of the Newgrange landscape. And I suppose, I hope that Newgrange does not need an introduction. It, apart from the fact that it's going to be on TV to a worldwide audience next week. That is next week, isn't it? What day is today? 6 days from now, actually. Yeah, Sunday, isn't it? For the solstice. It is probably Ireland's, or it's up there with the best known of the monuments. Controversially, it is not in fact the oldest, or the largest, should I say. The largest is its near neighbour, Nowth. I think it's something like 5 meters more in diameter than Newgrange, and it has an extra passage. Although, having said that, Newgrange still holds on to some of its secrets, despite all the archaeology that's been done there in recent decades. There's a portion of the monument that was never excavated. And the forgotten or forlorn of the trio, which is Dowth. Dowth not excavated in the modern era, but subject to what couldn't possibly be called an excavation in the 1840s. I would call it tomb raiding, treasure hunting, vandalism. And that accounts for the crater in the top of the mound here, because they dug down from the top and they decided when they'd finished, hadn't found anything. I think they were expecting to find some grand chamber full of gold. Having not found a grand chamber full of gold, they abandoned the place and it was left like that. Here's a map of the Bóinne landscape from Claire O'Kelly's book about the art of Bóinne. And so for a long time, this map was repeated in many publications, featuring the three great monuments, Knowth, Newgrange and Douth, and several others, a lot of smaller or satellite mounds that were dotted through the landscape, and a few of these large enclosures that we call henges, plus some other bits and pieces. Or there is actually a ring fort. Handy, isn't it? Or for ring fort. Here's a map that I made for the website about 15 years ago. And it had added some new features that had been discovered in the interim, and some for which we had more detail as a result of archaeological work. Bóinne, I believe, was one of the first archaeological landscapes of Ireland to be imaged in LiDAR. And I'm not sure if it's been done again in the interim, but I think that was around 2007, 2008. And it's really fascinating when you have the data in LiDAR, what the software can do. The software can make the light come from all sorts of different angles to highlight various bits and pieces. That's a vertical, top down, as it were, and that's Newgrange there. That's Knowth up there, and that's Douth there. Here's an oblique view of the same thing. And I took this image, which was shared on Twitter by, I don't know how to pronounce that name, Jost Hobich, I think. And I decided, wouldn't it be fun just so to demonstrate just to the ordinary public, the non-archaeological community, just how much you can see in that. And this isn't everything, of course. This is just a sample of what's there. You know, as I said earlier, the passage tombs, the main monuments, the smaller satellite mounds, the henges, the ring forts, and, for instance, other features you might be able to see here, something called a raised routeway, which had shown up in the LiDAR imagery. And then along came the Instar Boyne Valley Landscapes project, which was, I think the final report was published in 2010, which was a multidisciplinary study of the Bóinne landscape. And what was really fascinating about that was that it identified several dozen likely archaeological monuments or man-made features that hadn't previously been mapped. And I got really excited. I read the thing in full, I printed it out and highlighted lots of it. And I was particularly interested in a few things, but it was exciting because this map that we had seen for generations was becoming more and more complex all the time. And so, for example, in this LiDAR image from the Instar report, we have a henge monument that is labelled on the maps Site P. I think once upon a time it used to be labelled Site O, but then some archaeologist or other realised it's not a good idea to call a circular structure with the letter O, because the O just looks like another structure. So I think it was relabeled to Site P. Now that's one that was, we've known about that for a long time. It was identified in aerial imagery a century ago. It's quite denuded. It's quite difficult to see actually when you're on the ground, but it is probably a late Neolithic henge. It's an embanked enclosure, almost certainly dating to the late Neolithic. But in the field beside that, and this is where Instar was, I suppose, excuse the pun, groundbreaking. Apologies. There might be a few puns before the night's out. If there are any Mythical Ireland viewers watching, they'll know dad jokes and puns are apparently my specialty. But on the left side of that field, it was identified a structure that was labelled LP2, and LP2 simply means low profile site number 2. And it appeared to be a raised mound with the very faint remnants of what might be a ring around it. And so that was one of the sites that Instar decided, let's go and take a closer look at this. But in the same image, just take note of this linear feature that runs across the field. It's like a raised embankment. It's almost sort of rectangular, and it runs roughly from west to east or east to west if you prefer. Above that is a lake, and a small lake, a pond you might call it, which may be glacial or, you know, maybe very, very ancient, maybe a natural thing. It may also be some sort of a demesne landscape feature from the time that Newgrange, the townland as we know it today, was in the ownership of the likes of Charles Campbell in the late 17th century. And so in 2017, I got my first drone and I started flying over the landscape. I was photographing monuments anyway. And I thought, you know, it would be nice to put the drone up at certain times of the day and particularly certain times of the year, because you find that at sunrise and sunset, the shadows are long. So in this photograph here on the left, you can see the cursor, can't you? You can, yeah. So that's site P there. If you photograph it in the middle of a summer day, you won't, unless there are scorch marks in the grass, you won't see much of it. But with low sun and shadows, it looks quite well defined, but it's very broad. Of course, the difficulty with Bóinne and many of the archaeological monuments and landscapes of Eastern Ireland is that they're in Leinster, they're in the Bóinne Valley, they're in Meath, they're in rich farmland that has been exploited for not just decades, but in fact centuries. So we've lost a lot of monuments to the plough in previous centuries. But here's where I hope tonight's talk will at least inspire that they're not generally completely obliterated. There's still something beneath the surface. Anyway, there's the linear feature. I hope you can see that corresponds with the LiDAR image, which I've flipped so that south is at the bottom here. And note that the reason that was a good time of year, this was, as far as I remember, a wintertime shot, is because the sun was at an angle, whereas if the sun was directly on with that, you wouldn't see the shadow of it. So what's in that circle on the left? And this is where a magnetic gradiometry survey carried out by Kevin Barton revealed what appeared to be some sort of a linear structure with splayed features on the end of it, and what looked like a circular structure with possible breaks in it, regular breaks. And that's low profile site 2. Anyway, fast forward to 2018. I call it D-Day. This is the 10th of July 2018. D-Day, of course, standing for Discovery Day. The 10th of July 2018. And this was a day upon which, hang on, I just want to see if I can see the previews of the slides. Yeah, so I know what's coming next. Yeah, this is a day that, for, I hope, obvious reasons, I'll never forget. And so here is site P, which Geraldine Stout, in her book about Newgrange and the Bend of the Boyne, she looked at the medieval Dinshanicus, the metrical Dinshanicus, you know, where the monuments are actually given names and where the stories behind them were related. And she tried to identify which monuments in the Newgrange landscape might correlate with various entries in the Dinshanicus. So she calls this one Cashel Engaso. And that's interesting in itself, Cashel being an Irish word for a ring fort usually made out of stone. And this is spring of 2017. I know this because this is within a week of actually getting my first drone. I was out, and again, this sense that sunset is a great time. And you can see here, I hope, that this henge has an add-on, as it were. It has an annex on its eastern flank. Curious. Blank slide. So here's the same monument photographed on Tuesday, the 10th of July, 2018. And in fact, so there's a little bit of a build-up to this. It's not that I was flying that evening with intent so much as trying to look at the existing monuments in the Bóinne landscape to see if we could see, I could see, features of those monuments that weren't visible under normal circumstances. And Site P, with all the sheep grazing, what little grass there is after 2.5 months without seeing a single drop of rain, highly unusual in this part of the world. It did indeed reveal aspects which were later examined. I'm not an archaeologist, and certainly not a qualified archaeologist, so I left it to the experts. But one of the things that was really beautiful about this was something that is rarely seen with Site P, and in fact I'm not sure it had been seen before. What is the definition of a henge? You know, a circular or a subcircular, quasi-circular structure, usually consisting of an earthen bank, sometimes with one entrance, sometimes with two or more, with the ditch on the inside. And here in this image, we could not only see the parching, which suggests that there is in fact a lot of stone in the embankments, but we could see the narrower, darker ditch immediately inside that. Classic definition of a henge, minus the sheep. And there, just for comparison, is how Site P looks when there's been plenty of rain and the grass is growing and everything's looking very green and verdant. And just a couple of different angles of it. So I also, on this evening, this was after 8 o'clock in the evening, I was also aware the previous day I had read some articles on British news websites about several discoveries that had been made there by people flying drones. There was this unprecedented opportunity for discovery resulting from prolonged drought there as well. So in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you know, you never know. But now there was no expectation of finding anything, because at this moment in time, having familiarized myself with a lot of the archaeological literature and, as I said, studied the Instar report and other things in detail, I had satisfied myself that everything that was to be found of Bóinne had been found. It is, after all, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Archaeologists from all around the world have been to Bóinne, some of them excavating, and there's been lots and lots of non-invasive work at Bóinne over the decades. So there was no expectation of finding anything. So I was happily sweeping the drone around Site P. This is 8:28 p.m. At this moment in time, you have to understand, I wasn't using a very big tablet. So with my drone, even to this day, I still use a smartphone. So I'm seeing what you're seeing on that screen, I'm seeing that compressed into that size there. So you can probably see there's something in the crops in the upper right-hand portion of that image. If you can't, let me show it to you. Here, at that moment in time, I could not see that on my small screen. So I did what we call an orbit of Site P, trying to get as many angles as possible. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then I flew the drone over other parts of what is called the townland of Newgrange, most of which is occupied by Newgrange Farm, which is a privately run farm, which is also a visitor attraction. Bring the kids there during the summer and they get tractor rides around. They go to the petting farm. They can feed the lambs and they can see all the exotic birds, etc., etc. And I didn't, again, this is 8:32 p.m. I did not know it at the time of flying this, that there were several previously unidentified archaeological features in this image. For instance, bottom left, circular scorch mark running through the center of the image. What I saw, but I thought, must be an old field boundary, because, you know, what's happened in Ireland over generations and centuries is that smaller fields have generally knock the hedge and make them into bigger ones. So that was the assumption. Something that was previously identified, this curved scorched feature again, which would appear to be the remnant of something like a roadway or a laneway. And without further investigation, that could be 100 years old, that could be 1,000 years old, that could be older again. So without the help of more archaeological investigation, we won't know. 8:44 p.m. And I'm flying over Newgrange. And even, again, I did not see this at the time, but in the 80s, David Sweetman excavated part of what is called the pit circle at Newgrange. And you can actually see the pits are very, very well defined in that image. Something else that I'd never seen before, I hope you can see it there. So the drainage that was put in during the excavations, the pipes, the culverts, as it were, are the scorch marks in the grass are revealing what's beneath the surface. And so crop marks visible in wheat in particular, barley to a lesser extent, they're caused by the fact that the roots are trying to get down to find that moisture. And in parched conditions where there is no moisture, if there's a part of a field, I hope some of you will know this already, but just for those who don't and those who are watching online, if you've got this pristine, remember that most of the landscape in front of Newgrange is alluvial in nature. It was formed at the end of the last ice age. And basically, until somebody digs to maybe bury some posts, to put some stones in there, that landscape hasn't been touched since the time of the ice and all of the meltwater. And so when you dig a hole, such as, for instance, for pits like that, that leaves evidence behind, which archaeologists all over the place today find in terms of digging out post holes and pits. But something else that's interesting is, because the compaction of the soil, the nature of how compressed it is, changes. Because sometimes these features fill in naturally. It's not like somebody digs a hole, puts a post hole into it, and then, decades later comes back and shovels all the muck back in. Usually what happens is, with the post rots in place or is burnt in place, and then there's a higher organic content, and the soil density is different, and the roots of the crops exploit this. They're able to get down further and suck out the moisture, which means that basically crops growing out of these archaeological features are generally greener and healthier than those growing out of the soil that hasn't been disturbed. And so at around 8:40 p.m, I started to get this familiar warning on the screen and a beeping sound from the drone controller saying, low battery, return to home. Because what happens if you don't? The thing runs out of power and falls from the sky and smashes into 1,000 pieces. And that's bye-bye drone archaeology until you can afford another one. As it happens, I had spare batteries. I was actually thinking I'm going to pack the drone away and go home, because I'd been working in Dublin all day and it was 9:15 at night. But I've never been able to explain why, but I decided to fly again. And I put the drone back up in the air, and at 14 seconds past, 47 minutes past 8, saw this as I flew the drone down across the landscape again. So I saw it this time. And this enormous, what looked like a circular impression in the field. Now I have to tell you something. I've told this story a few times. I let out an exclamation, which went like this. As far as I can recall, it might have been, what the hell is that? But the way there's moments in your life that fly by in a second, and you don't realize until they're in the past how momentous they are. It could have been something nastier than hell. At this point, Ken Williams, who's another photographer, and we share a lot of interests, and he's very interested in the archaeological landscape of Bóinne as well. He had arrived. He'd been up at Newgrange taking pictures. And he had his drone. So we were, at this point, his drone was also in the air. And so when I let out this exclamation, he came over and said, what are you seeing? And I said, west of Site P, in the field next to Site P, there's this very large circular impression. And he said, I'll go and take a look. And we had to coordinate our altitudes. We had to make sure to fly at slightly different altitudes so that the drones didn't crash into each other. And at this point, I had flown closer to it and was circling around it. You see, in the first moment, my very, very first impression was, wow, it looks like maybe a tractor has kind of driven around in a circle, revving up the tires as it's going. And then, you know, these things, just with recollection, the things that fly through your mind in a couple of moments, that it almost looked like the impression of a circus big top. You know, that there had been a big top pitch there, because I could see that there were these dots around it that looked like they might have been for staking up the ropes, holding up the tent. But of course, as I flew closer, it became obvious that's a standing crop. There's no way these are tire marks of a tractor. There's no way there was a circus there. And in any case, the circuses go to the big towns. They don't generally plonk themselves in the middle of a rural field, miles away from civilization, although it's not far from civilization, in fairness. And so what I was imaging was this apparently complex, very large structure, or at least the image of it in the crop marks. And there's the River Boyne there to the right. And what gives it scale probably are the tram lines, you know, those twin, parallel twin tracks. That each of those is the width of a tractor. And so I knew this is something very large. And I suppose as I orbited the drone around and took the pictures, the one thing that was very firm with me and with Ken when we discussed it was there is no recorded monument in that part of the Bóinne landscape. And I was flashing back to Instar, and I was thinking the only thing that's recorded there is this linear feature that I showed you earlier in the LiDAR, which may or may not correspond with a discoloration there. And here it is showing the proximity to Newgrange. There is Newgrange in the background. So I think from centre to centre, it's 800 metres. Like it's less than a kilometre away, down on the floodplain, close to the river, but in sight of the great monument of Newgrange. And yeah, I can tell you without any hesitation that by the time the evening was finished, Ken and I, when we landed our drones, having taken all these images, we said, what will we do now? And we decided we'd go back to my house so that we could look at them on a larger screen, because, as I said, I was only seeing them on a very small screen. And it's then, I suppose, the reality hit us that this really couldn't be anything other than a henge. And that would make it a very, very ancient. So here it is. Sorry, here it is, I say. That's the wrong screen. With Site P behind. And one of the things that has become apparent since then is Site P and Dronehenge, this monument that I discovered, became known as Dronehenge. The German newspaper Der Spiegel gave it that name the next day when they reported on it. The headline was Dronehenge. Sounds like Stonehenge, discovered with a drone, Dronehenge. Brilliant. Stroke of genius. I always say, who knew the Germans had such a good sense of humour? It turns out, and this was evidenced by work that has been done also more recently by Steve Davis and can't remember the other surname. They did a joint paper, and it's something like Rachman, or I can't remember. They did a joint paper. Anyway, they compared the sizes. It turns out that Dronehenge and Site P are identical in many respects. It's like they're copies of the same monument. which leads me to lots of questions. Dronehenge even has the annex, the curved annex that Site P has. There's what looks like a narrow entrance in the west-northwestern aspect of Site P that is repeated here with this rectangular, which looks like an entrance-like or a porch-like structure. And when you overlay them, they're identical in dimensions. And one of the big questions for me that hasn't been answered because there hasn't been any excavation of either of these monuments is, which came first? Was Dronehenge a precursor of Site P? Did they build something in timber and then realize, hey, this takes a lot of maintenance because wood rots, right? And as far as we know, in the late Neolithic, people didn't treat wood with conservatives or creosote or whatever, to prolong their lifetime. So if you made it out of timber, it would require constant maintenance. Whereas if you just scoop up the earth and make an earthen embankment, you've got basically a permanent version of the same thing. But as I say, that question, at this moment in time, unanswered. And then that mysterious rectangular porch like feature, which to all intents and purposes looks like it could be some sort of grand entrance. I really loved some of the terminology coming from the professional archaeologists, in particular Steve Davis. He coined a phrase or a word for this, which I really love: the ticket office. But maybe we haven't really changed. That when we build in modern times arenas, why do we build big spaces where people can gather? Usually to watch a spectacle. That could be sport. Usually sport. Could be soccer. It could be Gaelic football. It could be baseball. It could be cricket. It could be athletics. Sometimes it's music, rock concerts, etc. Sometimes it's very grand theatrical performances. But yeah, when we do that, we also insist on not just allowing it to be a free-for-all, that we control the entrances and exits. And then, as I say, these features, which, again, just to emphasize about Dronehenge, it is unprecedented in that it has got a combination of features that have not been seen before at any other site. So, for instance, the regular double ditched sections and the unexcavated portion, almost like a causewayed enclosure. And if you look carefully, you'll also see that the inner one, the inner circle of broken ditch sections appears to be much better defined than the outer one. And the reason for that, I don't know, but the archaeologists who've studied it don't appear to have a definite answer to that either. So as I say, you've got these two structures side by side. What's the difference? Well, one of them is fairly obvious when you see it on the ground, or certainly from the air. The other one vanished into the mists of time, probably, I'm speculating, probably in the late Neolithic. That monument had a short lifespan, was mostly made of timber. It either rotted in place or, there is precedent for this, might have been ceremonially burned after it was in use. And there may have been remnants of it visible on the surface, but certainly in recent centuries, all sign of those had disappeared. And a view of it looking to the west. And again, looking at so in this image here, you see, this is the LP2 site, which we're going to just have another look at in a moment, I think. So there's two henges in this image. There's LP2 there. So we saw this also, myself and Ken, on the evening, and got all excited. But then we're like, oh yeah, but there is a recorded site there. And so yeah, afterwards I took my drone image and the gradiometry image and oriented them so that you were looking at them from the same angle. Now, I don't know how much a magnetic gradiometry survey costs, but I know how much a drone costs, and I bet you the image on the right costs a lot less than the image on the left. And I'd say the image on the right shows more detail. But again, that's not down to just the drone technology. That was down to this, what has been called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I have to disagree with that now, knowing what I know in 2025, principally that these monuments have become visible again in conditions that were much less favourable to the formation of crop marks. And here is a National Monument Service image. So a few days after the discovery, on Friday the 13th of July 2018, National Monument Service put a helicopter in the air with a professional photographer and blitzed the whole area, taking as many pictures as possible, and produced a report in December of that year, which interpreted a lot of the detail that was visible. And by the way, that's still available to download for free on the internet. I think it's called the Interim Report. It shouldn't be hard to find. And then we had basically 3 in a row. So LP2 in the foreground, Dronehenge and Site P, you know, reminding me certainly of Thornborough. The big difference being there's no linking, what's it called, causeway or linking pathway joining the 3, or the Pretty Circles in Somerset. And then towards the northern part of that same field with Dronehenge and LP2 in it, this very blotched landscape consisting of features that no single archaeologist has been able to say with any certainty. There's a view that these are actually fossilized vegetation marks. There's a view that you know, these are related to glacial soil and stone movements. There is certainly a feature running diagonally through that image, which possibly could be the remnants of a late ice age or so water channel. But one of the theories is that these are hearths, you know. Again, no excavation. So for the moment, we're left interpreting the aerial images as our only evidence, as it were. And then in the far northeastern corner of the field, a feature that was recorded in the National Monument Service database as a ring ditch. But as Ken and I discovered in our imagery in July 2018, that ain't no ring ditch. It is actually almost certainly a grooved wear timber circle, otherwise known as a four-poster. And as I always say to the uninitiated, four-poster relating to the 4 posts in the interior that form a square or a rectangle, nothing to do with a bed. This is the first thing people think when they think 4-poster. Nope, nothing to do with a bed. It turns out there are, I think, 6 of these at Bóinne. One of them was excavated by Helen Roach and Professor George Ogan at Knowth in the 1990s. And if you go to Knowth today, you can see a reconstruction of it. They've put timber posts into the excavated post holes to give you an idea what it looked like when it was in use. Except for this one is the largest one ever found on the island of Ireland. It's pretty enormous. And you'll see there's another ring around it, which is possibly the remnants of a palisade. You know, double ring of posts here, and flattened, not exactly circular, and also linear palisades or fences running off towards the east, perhaps indicating the entrance to the monument. And then in close proximity to that, so there's the 4-poster, myself and Ken also imaged large arcs of what looked like, you know, fairly tightly spaced post holes. And at the time we were saying, is this part of a super henge, a much bigger structure? And there's a National Monument Service image of the same thing taken a few days later. So just to compare, well, they later found that this monument actually, or this feature, extends into the adjoining fields, and they gave it a name. They called it the Great Palisade. Turns out that it is a triple fence of posts stretching across 900 metres, almost a kilometre, of the middle terrace of the Newgrange landscape. And there's all sorts of questions as to why you would do that. And we could offer a little bit of speculation, which we might do in a moment. I didn't realise, but this pre-Dronehenge discovery image from the 10th of July 2018 also features this Great Palisade, which I, as I said, had dismissed almost in my mind as an old field boundary. And something inside that, which is visible in the images, but I didn't notice it. The National Monuments picked up on this, a Frankfurter or pill-shaped feature, which they reckon has cognates in Britain in the late Neolithic, what they call mortuary enclosures, some structure where dead were treated. And then several rings, a couple of them very, very large, one of which hadn't been imaged before, picked up by Ken Williams, and again here, also photographed by the National Monument Service. I think they call those the Riverside Henges. And that's Mound B. So that's one of the largest, that is the largest of all the satellite mounds at Bóinne. It's 40 meters in diameter, but because it's never been excavated, of course, it's been left as an unclassified mound. But there are, I think it's safe to say, there's a lot of archaeologists who think that's likely to be an unexcavated passage tomb. There's myself and Ken back in my house on the evening of the discovery. Having looked at the images and decided we were actually going to bypass the normal reporting procedure. And the reason we did that was my journalistic hat came on and I said, but Ken, someone could go out there and fly a drone tomorrow and share these images. We have to share them now so that, you know, that we get credited with the discovery if it is a discovery. And so before we parted company for the night, I said, we better get a picture because you never know, this could be a historic night. Well, it turned out it was, because next day the story went viral. And by the time 2-3 weeks had elapsed, some of the photographs I've shown you tonight had been seen by hundreds of millions of people around the world. And I'm not exaggerating that number. Hundreds of millions, because they were broadcast on American TV networks. They were in the Washington Post and the New York Times. They were on South African TV. They were on Japanese and Chinese TV. And of course, all over Europe. So a National Monuments Service, this is in that report that I mentioned earlier, showing some of the features. Now, let's just make something clear here. Some of these are previously recorded monuments, but some of them aren't. So this is Site P, this is Site A, the mound and the henge around it. This is the Great Palisade, which hadn't been recorded before. This is the four-poster, this is Dronehenge. So how many henges are in that image? There's one, LP2. There's 2, that's Dronehenge. There's 3, that's Site P. There's 4, that's Site A. I love the way archaeologists of a century and so ago in the Victorian era just picked letters of the alphabet to label everything. That is one of the Riverside Henges. That's the one that Ken found. That is the one that circles around a small mound, very denuded mound called Site B1, which is assumed to be associated with Mound B. And 7. Can you see 7? Look. Down here, hats off to the National Monument Service. They were the ones who looked at this right tucked in between Dronehenge and LP2. They found enough evidence to suggest, well, there's another henge or part henge in here. And of course, this is another unanswered question. Is this one that was started and unfinished? And again, we're looking at something that appears to be a close cognate of Dronehenge. Did they, you know, start one and it was burnt down and then they moved? And the curious thing about a lot of these monuments and structures is they respect each other's boundaries. They don't overlap. And that has led several archaeologists to suggest, well, they might all have been standing at the same time, you know? Because if these are timber monuments, especially these 3, if there's a significant aspect of these is timber, you know, if they're in different eras, you're not necessarily going to know where the old one was, so you might overlap. Are there more? And the answer is quite possibly. Even at this point, in 2025, we cannot be certain that all that is to be found at Newgrange has been found. That's a 3D reconstruction by a Turkish 3D artist called Kerem Gogus. And he put these images together based on, as much information. It's a conceptual reconstruction of what the upright timbers with maybe crossbars might have looked like. A vast monument. Is there another one in there? So in the late spring and early summer of 2020, just as the COVID limit in the Republic, it was 2 kilometers for a while, and then it was increased to 5 and then more. But just as those, the 2 kilometer limit was relaxed, I was able to get the drone out to Newgrange Farm. I think I was the only one because nobody else was close enough. And there was another drought in the spring, in the late spring of 2020. So 2 years after Dronehenge, there was another opportunity to image the landscape. Now, I don't know how many of you are archaeologists and how many of you are like me, just passionately interested in these things. But this image is actually packed with possible archaeological features. But in there, in the middle of that, could be another, it looks like a large, possibly circular structure. Running across the middle of that, or the lower part of that, you see here, the Great Palisade. Look at the detail. Now you can see that there's, as I said, a triple fence. So there is a single palisade of posts laid out at regular intervals here, and then a double one here. And a big question about the Great Palisade, from my point of view, is why are you fencing off? Fences are generally only used for one thing. In modern day times, sometimes we use them for decorative purposes in our garden. Generally, fences are to keep something in or to keep something out. Humans, livestock, wild animals, etc., etc. And then in 2020, I also found this, 2 square features sitting exactly on the double palisade, the northern double fence of the Great Palisade. And there's a top-down image. And the only thing I can offer here as a non-archaeologist and without any further information than what you see in the images is that this was the gateway. Because generally when you build fences and walls, there has to be a way, if you're keeping something in or something out, great. But as with all walled cities and defences, you have to allow, there's some point at which you have to allow people or animals in or out. To me, it looked a bit like a barbican. I was reminded of Lawrence Gate in Drogheda, which is an Anglo-Norman twin tower gate that guarded the medieval city of Drogheda, built in the late 12th or early 13th century. By the way, at the bottom of the road where I grew up. So here's this same field. And look, there's another feature here which might be a circle. And then there are these curious linear features which I mean, I don't know. They could be man-made. Of course, they could relate to geomorphology. They could be natural. They could be related to geology. And then this very, very curious, I identified it in 1 or 2 of the previous images. This, when you see parching like that, it usually indicates there's a lot of stone down there, which is impeding, in this case, the roots of the grass from getting down to access the moisture. I'm not a betting man, but I'd certainly put a few quid on that being a cairn. And if it's a cairn, where it is, it's highly likely to be a passage tomb, a slightly flattened or denuded passage tomb. So that's this structure here. There it is again. Curious one. Needs further investigation. That's that same field. This is a composite image, stitched all the vertical images together. Again, down where the riverside henges are, they are reasonably clearly visible in 2020. So 2 years after this unprecedented once-in-a-lifetime drought, the stuff is showing up again. There's the cursus to the east of Newgrange, this U-shaped cursus. And it was Ken Williams who identified in the northern portion of this, there are regularly arrayed what look like post holes. So that's interesting because there's a bit of a disagreement in the archaeological community. Some archaeologists say this is a cursus, others say actually it could be a fairly recent landscape feature, but we won't know until there's excavation. And then, so site Z, which is the mostly destroyed passage tomb inside the curtilage of the Newgrange site, right beside the Newgrange monument. But site Z1, which had been identified as a sort of a blip in the landscape by the O'Kellys in the 1960s, I think. Well, archaeologists who had looked at this commented that you can clearly see a portion of what's obviously the curb of this, and also what appears to be a cruciform passage and chamber. One archaeologist said at the time, Z1 is to Z as K is to L. So to the west of Newgrange are two satellite passage tombs, which are just about visible in this image. And the one closer to Newgrange is larger, and the one further away is smaller. And it's like that's mimicked either side of Newgrange. It's like you've got the big monument, then outside of that, two medium-sized passage tombs, and outside that, two smaller ones. There's also a lot going on in that field. I don't have the time, but I identified a few circular and linear markings in that field. There's that white cairn again. I need to move on because I'm conscious of time. Oh yeah, in the upper portion of that, see beside the riverside henge there, a couple of small circles that look like they could be possible ring ditches. There's the Frankfurter, the Great Palisade, Site A, the Henge, again with its annex, so very like Site P and Dronehenge. And here's a top-down view of that, again captured in 2020, in the spring drought of 2020. And I stitched all the images together and then I labeled them. But then I realized afterwards people were complaining they couldn't see the red labels, so I probably should go back and do those again. And there's a structure here, which appears to be part of a sub-rectangular enclosure with an entrance in it, unidentified linear markings. Who knows what they are? They could be old field boundaries. They could be prehistoric. This likely roadway, lots of stone underneath. Here's a panorama of an area. This is Mound A1 and the area leading towards the Standing Stone. I think that's Standing Stone C. But what was interesting about this is when I imaged it in 2020, it appears, again, this is grass, it appears to show stone, and I wondered whether this wasn't a quite well-defined curb, because this monument is quite difficult to classify. Again, it's never been excavated. It's been surveyed at ground level, and it's been imaged from the air. But nobody, I suppose the unprecedented conditions of the drought gave us this opportunity to see it. So here it is. Here's the same mound in a winter frosty morning image. And you can see that, you know, there's like a berm there or something, but then there's like a smaller a mound and a bit of possibly quarrying. Don't ignore these circles along the hedge. They're not archaeological. They're related to feeders for the sheep. There's LP2, curiously showing up as a bleached area and a ring. I think that was a spring or late spring image as well. There's Site P again. I have to move on. Beneath, south of Site A, there's a structure there. Excuse my very poorly drawn circle around it, which I did with my mouse earlier. There's another possible henge there. Here's Site B, and so a previously identified very denuded smaller mound called Site B1. But in this spring image taken a number of years ago, there appeared to be a ditch around it. So that's interesting. Possibly a barrow. And then just a quick look at a few things outside of the Newgrange landscape, but not too far away. I could show you well over 200, but I'm not going to, because you wouldn't have the time and you'd be all asleep and they'd be throwing us out. A ring fort at Fenor, which is between Nowth and Slane. And I discovered this in August of 2020. And a ring fort with an entrance. So north is, yeah, north is this direction. So this entrance is actually facing east. And then during I think it was 2021, the pandemic was still kind of lurking around, but myself and my son had gotten used to going for lunchtime walks, and I said to him, I had gotten a new drone, and I said, do you want to go down and we'll walk the dog along the river in Drogheda and try to fly the drone and just have a look? And sure, you know, the day after we started doing that, I've imaged this and sent it to Steve Davis, and he said, send it to Niall Gregory. Dr. Niall Gregory is an Irish, the foremost expert, I'm told, on dugout boats. And when I sent it to him, his immediate reply was, that is 100% without any doubt a dugout boat. And he later examined it. Again, that made headlines because of the imagery, I suppose, and a bit of video. I also found this much longer, slender dugout boat lying in shallow waters in the Bóinne, not far from the southern shore of the Bóinne. And this is an area of Drogheda where people walk all the time. But you see, it's only when you're directly above it in shallow water with a drone that you see this kind of detail. When you look at it, at the water from any sort of an oblique angle, the light, the reflection of the sky makes it impossible to see down to these depths. And these images were captured at low tide, but also following a period of low rainfall. There's very little water in the river, allowing you to see these things. There's another one. This one, I was later told by National Monument Service, had previously been recorded. There's another half a dugout boat. In this case, that is Dr. Gregory examining and measuring the boat before it was submerged. This was at low tide, before it was submerged again. And a fifth fragment of a boat. That, interestingly, these are in a stretch that I didn't put an overall image in, which I'm now disappointed I didn't, because this is an area of the Bóinne just west of the main bridge in Drogheda, the Bridge of Peace, between the Bridge of Peace and the motorway bridge, where the river very broadens out and gets very shallow. And what happens in the wintertime, when there's a lot of rainfall and storms, a lot of wood, trees, fallen boughs and all of that gets carried down, but it reaches this part of the river. It's almost like a delta where the river spreads out, and basically a lot of stuff gets snagged and dropped and gets stuck in the what we call the estuarine mud there. In March of this year, a ring fort at Heathtown, and that wouldn't be too far from Fourknocks. If anybody has heard of Fourknocks, Fourknocks would be another very well-known passage tomb, about 10 miles as the crow flies from Newgrange in the county of Meath. And then I spotted this very large, what looked to be double-ditched enclosure on Heathtown Hilltop. And this was in August of last year. And what's fascinating about this is an unrecorded, probably a man-made monument, almost certainly. Look, here in the background, you can see the surviving portion of an embanked enclosure, documented by Geraldine Stout, among others, that when it was complete, was much bigger than the Bóinne, the Newgrange Henges, which are, by the way, approximately 150 meters in diameter, around about 500 feet in diameter. This one was bigger, but this monument appears to be within the curtilage of that likely late Neolithic embanked enclosure. It's been classified by National Monument Service, that's a vertical, a top-down view. It's been classified as a prehistoric ceremonial enclosure, which we all know is a way of saying we don't know what era it belongs to, but it's almost certainly prehistoric. From my point of view, one possibility which would really greatly excite me is that it could just possibly be an early Neolithic causewayed enclosure. And when people mention causewayed enclosures to me, I get very excited. Here is Dr. Toby Driver, who's involved in the Royal Commission for Archaeology in Wales. and specializes in aerial archaeology. And he took the image and said, yeah, I'll try to map out what we can definitely see in that image. And that's what he could see. And then curiously, I picked up on this. It looked to me like there's a double ring there. And I didn't know whether I was seeing things or not. That could be a barrow. But one thing that really excited me about it was it looked an awful lot like the four-poster that we had found at Newgrange. So this is all on private farmland. An awful lot of what I've shown you tonight hasn't been excavated. And there's no immediate sign that that will happen in the forthcoming time. This is the Heath Town, this large structure that I've just been showing you as it appeared in March of this year. And I was excited at this time because it was spring. I thought if we get a good year weather-wise, this could show up. But what happened was we got lots of rain and the crop got really healthy. And when there's lots of rain, the crop marks just don't show up. This is in the townland of Morrill in County Meath, near Navan, a ring fort that I found in the spring of this year that had previously not been recorded, and that's a top-down view of it. Curiously, it does look like a little bit like a diamond ring. It looks a little bit like a Dronehenge with a little porch on it. But if you look in that image, there are older field boundaries here, and there could be something there just to do with the corner of the field or something. Very hard to tell. And then this ring ditch in Kilcairn, the adjoining townland that showed up again unrecorded. The big question is, so I've been flying my drone and studying Google Earth and images and Apple Maps, and I've so far found probably around 250 previously unrecorded monuments. Dronehenge was the first, and I don't think I'll ever beat it. But there's a question here, and specifically when we're talking about Newgrange, is there more to be discovered? I tell you what we definitely can say is the answer cannot be no. And it almost certainly must be yes, that there is more to be found. And that's partly because there is no complete geophysical survey of Bóinne. Even in 2025, there is no complete joined up singular entity like there is for other landscapes in Britain and Europe, where every field and every feature has been mapped in as many different ways as possible. And just to say that I didn't bring it down because it's heavy, but I have a box of books up there and the 2026 Mythical Ireland calendar, which features these, I hope you agree, lovely views of Irish monuments and landscapes, including actually the June image is one that I didn't feature in the show or in the presentation. This extraordinary early medieval landscape of ring forts, very close to Newgrange. And then my books of particular interest from tonight would be the two, Mythical Ireland and the book that is called Dronehenge, the story behind the remarkable discovery at Newgrange. So I'd like to wish you all a happy winter solstice, of course, because that's on Sunday, and a happy Christmas. And thank you for having me along tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Anthony, thank you so much indeed. I thought that was absolutely fascinating.
Good.
I mean,
that's one.
Having this huge screen in here, of course, it makes it all splendid. I don't know how you managed, when you were just looking in your little phone, to recognize so much just from that. But as you say, there's probably still stuff to be discovered.
Without a doubt.
Depends totally on the weather, the circumstances. It's different every day, and it's just being there at the right time. You're obviously getting very, very good at picking those right times. It's
become obvious to me that crop marks are visible every year. but it depends on what crop is growing. And because of crop rotation, you know, wheat is the best. So for instance, there are forms of brassicas and that aren't really not good for showing up, you know. So flying regularly is actually the thing, you know, and in all seasons, not so much in winter, but certainly spring, summer, and late summer, you know.
So if you're happy to take a few questions.
I'm very happy to take a few questions, except for ones I can't answer.
Is that area of Bóinne so special that so many monuments seem to survive there?
Yeah.
What is it about the landscape? Is it just the soil?
That's a big part of it. I'm not sure if the online viewers can hear the question, so I might repeat the question. This gentleman is asking what makes that area special and why there are so many monuments there. I think that's a big part of it. The Boyne Valley, County Meath, is the most fertile landscape for mixed farming. And we know this is exploited not just in the Neolithic, largest passage tombs ever built in Ireland, built there. The idea is that if you're farming and you're doing it well, you've got livestock and you're also sowing and harvesting crops, you've got the sort of food security that didn't exist in the Mesolithic and the hunter-gatherer era. But also, you see, the river is the access route, and everything happens by water transport, long before wheeled transport and mechanization, long before roads. You know, in a very still, in the Neolithic, still a very densely forested landscape. The river is tidal all the way to Bóinne. So it's a means of bringing people in and also materials in, which they exploited. Beyond that, then, there's the sacred element of it, which we have very little understanding of because of the remoteness of that period and the fact they didn't write anything down. There's clearly something that you know, draws them to this landscape in the first place, and then to create this massive complex. There's a religious or spiritual underpinning to that, which I think we've probably a poor understanding of at this remove.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Yes, Rosie.
Sorry, do you think there's any significance in the pools that are very close to those sites?
Do I think there's any significance to the pools close to those sites? Yes, I do. Now, Instar, as far as I know, so there are circular ponds, and they're visible in some of those images. There are sort of like almost like conjoined circular ponds. As I'm talking, I'll try to show you, which look artificial. They do not look like natural ponds. Of course, as soon as you go looking for something, that's when you can't find it. But Instar looked at a pond in the townland of Monk Newtown, which is, I think it's about a mile to the north of Newgrange. And that was long thought to be maybe a natural pond, but there was uncertainty about it. And I think they did coring and other things. And I think as a result of that work, I can't find the ponds now. As a result of that work, I think they're leaning much more now towards the likelihood that that's actually a man-made feature. I suppose the big question about the double ponds down in front of Newgrange, I'm trying to see if they're on the LiDAR image. Yes, they are, but they're kind of hard to see. Go all the way back. Can I go back to the start here? Or I can just do that. Yeah, there they are. Look, those two. I'm very suspicious about. You know, one of the comments about the Newgrange monumental landscape is that, and I think it was National Monuments in their report, I could be mistaken, and I'm happy to be corrected afterwards, a designed landscape, you know. Part of the problem here is this whole townland of Newgrange, after the Battle of the Boyne, came into the, well, he actually didn't own it, he rented it, but was given to Charles Campbell, who was a Scottish settler. And there isn't a great record of exactly what he did and those who came after him in terms of, because the demesnes often have these artificial features, tree rings, ponds, fancy entrance driveways, etc. And that one, the bleached route that we saw through some of those images, that one there, that actually, if you follow that, it leads to the site of what used to be Newgrange House, which Campbell built. By the way, he wanted to build it using stones from Newgrange. That's how the entrance to Newgrange was rediscovered. So I've given you a very long-winded way of saying I don't know, but I'm certainly very intrigued by the possibility that those ponds are prehistoric. Something interesting that happens there, sorry, I know this is a bit of an aside, it's just an observation, but I can't remember now what I was for, there we go. In the winter time, Newgrange is a wintering ground for the whooper swans that come from Iceland in significant numbers, more than 50 per winter. When they arrive at Newgrange Farm, they land at Site P, which is just off the image here, upper right, and they spend time around. And even the newt swans who were there all year long, they love those ponds. Given the significance of swans to the mythology of Newgrange, it has me wondering whether this wasn't all part of some religious, spiritual, cosmological inspiration for what was going on there. That they saw these birds arriving in October, what is now October, spending the winter and then disappearing again in the spring. And there was a mystique to that that's clearly incorporated into some of the stories of Newgrange. And I just wonder whether that wasn't part, because I was there a few years ago. I was at Newgrange Farm with a film crew talking about Dronehenge, and we saw the whoopers arrive. I've been told that you can set your cat, you can see, if you see them arriving for the first time, it's October the 14th. Apparently they arrive on a very specific day. They circled around in a flock and then they landed down at Site P. And after they did that, some of them walked over to the two ponds in this image. And I just wonder if they're doing that because that's what they've been doing for thousands of years. Pure speculation on my part.
Interesting, because in Scotland's Armagh is a Neolithic man. For a long time they thought it was a motte, about the height of a motte. And at the foot of it, quite close to it, there's a circular, very artificial pond, and I've always wondered about it.
Yeah. A lot of the vast majority, there's something like 135 prehistoric monuments and likely monuments at Bóinne.
Scotland, that would be an area where you get overwintering birds as well.
Yeah.
Don't know if swans, but
and very few of them have been excavated. Some have been surveyed, LiDAR. There's been some GPR, some ground penetrating radar. So look, there's a very open question around a lot of these. I can't answer your question, but like you, I'm intrigued.
landed.
Yeah.
Interesting to run the drone there.
Hey, that sounds like a good idea.
Very clear.
Count me in. So
Yeah, right. Are they fed?
I've never seen them dry.
Are they fed from somewhere?
No. They're not fed artificially, no.
So it's just
It's water table stuff, obviously, yeah. I've seen them low. In 2018, they were low, but I've never seen them dry. Must actually ask the landowner, because I know him very well, and his parents owned that farm. I think they bought it back in the 60s or the 70s, so they've had it for a long time. I must ask, has it ever been bone dry, the twin ponds? I think there might be an online question, is there? Ah, yeah.
have you looked south of the river?
Not in as much detail, but yes, certainly I have. Curious thing about Bóinne is the the monumental aspect of the landscape and those maps I showed you in the very early part of the talk, like almost everything is located to the north of the river and bounded by the river. It's not a single curved bend, but you know, it's like a promontory, and it's like that. This gives it a distinction, perhaps a cosmological distinction that we don't know about. So it's not that there's nothing on the south side. Excuse me. In terms of what there is on the north side, there's no existing evidence of large-scale passage tombs. There may be a couple of possibles, I think, up on Red Mountain. As far as I can see, there are no large-scale embanked enclosures. Interestingly, in the mythological traditions of Bóinne, just here in this corner, overlooking the river, is Cletchach. It's Rosnaree House today, but Cletchach was not only the place where Cormac MacArt, the famous High King, lived out the last years of his life, but it was in the mythology of the monuments. One of the deities closely associated with Newgrange was Elkmar, and when he was forced out of Newgrange by Angus Og, the Dagda, who was Angus's father and the supreme deity, said, look, don't worry, I'm going to give you somewhere else that's equally as good. And he said that it was Cletchach. So the mythology would suggest that at one time there was a significant monument, probably a mound like Newgrange, on that southern side. The difficulty, of course, is, as I say, there's a house there today, and I know the owner of the house, and I've said to her, do you think maybe Rosnaree House is like Douth Hall? Because Douth Hall, which is here, a week after Dronehenge was revealed to the world, it was revealed that archaeologists had been digging under and around this house, which was built in the 1760s, and found that it had actually been built on top of a passage tomb. And it made me wonder about Rosnaree House. Was it also built on the remnants of a passage tomb? And again, not a betting man, but on the basis of a mythological tradition, I know there's a lot of archaeologists who say, no, I'd never go there, but I would, because myth is very rarely wrong about things like that. Quick answer to your question is, the north side of the river seems to be where all the action is. Yeah.
What happened to the dugout boats? Were they removed from the river?
No. I suppose my duty in relation to the boats was to report them. I like to talk about archaeology and history and the past publicly. I like people to take an interest in the past. So yeah, I publicized it. This one, I unfortunately don't know what happened to it. All I know is that a couple of years after I took that image, I went back looking for it and it wasn't there anymore. Now, when I asked National Monuments Service about whether these were going to be taken out of the river, I wasn't given a definitive reply, but I understand that when you take them out, you have to preserve them. And that's, it's not just a matter of lashing a coat of paint on them or something. It's a laborious and costly exercise. And being in the water is what actually preserves them. So I understand, and I'm open to correction, and I certainly don't want to misquote anyone, but I understand that most of the logboats that are discovered in Ireland are either left where they were found or moved even into deeper water, because that's the cheapest and easiest way to preserve them. And Dr. Gregory tells me that over the past couple of centuries, around 500 dugout boats have been found in rivers and lakes on the island of Ireland. So there's a lot of them too. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the Lurgan canoe in the National Museum in Dublin, the big one. You know, it's great that we can see them up close, but the reality is we take those out of the water a couple of months later, they're crumbling to bits and they're lost. Whereas if they're in the water, they're being preserved.
Some really excellent photographs taken there. Really good. Let's make a couple of comparisons really with a site, this part of the world, down in Hatton.
Oh, yes.
The drone survey 2018
Yeah.
per year. One interesting thing I think is that we're looking at the henge, especially site A henge, and that's characteristic of having a bowl to one side and a flattened back,
Yeah.
and passage sits
Mm.
not in the middle of it, but sort of 1/3, 2/3
Off centre, yeah.
soft set. I find that the interesting thing is that the same thing happens really at the Giant's Ring. Now they've got a large henge which are folded on one side and flattened back to it, and passes to sits in the same sort of 1/3, 2/3 situation. And at the Giant's Ring, as with I think with these other henges we've got here, the henge is actually just built around passage to.
Yeah.
So that's the important relationship there. But the Giant's Ring, it's a flat back, it's built right up against quite a steep slope. So there's no opportunity of extending the across. So I wondered if that, in fact, the Giant's Ring could be, as it were, the precursor of these hedges. And that's, they're taking that organisation of that back, the passage to, and the bottom there. And in the same way, your very site that you showed there, for Bóinne, there we have an expert example of that.
Yes.
And the interesting thing about one with the site in Bóinne, it's exactly twice the size. So it's a duplication of exactly twice the size. The post holes are more visible, but the post holes seem to be about the same distance apart as the attics are.
Right.
And that's also for those who have as well. So it is fascinating when you say that there must be more sites. Of course there must be. But the interesting thing is that there are certain, almost like sacred areas, aren't there, where once you get maybe one or two sites, then they proliferate other sites. And it's fascinating period as well. At the end of the Neolithic, there's all this monument building going on. And you know, what are all the people that did all this? What are they doing it for? I mean, we still don't know. That's a basic problem, isn't it?
Right.
So you build all these monuments, cut down all these trees, thousands and thousands of trees being cut down, posts being dug. But I also thought it was really rather interesting the fact that you have sort of almost like a series of henges, and your drone henge, it seems to be the most sophisticated of them all.
Mm.
And I wonder if there is sort of a site called movement through the Bóinne landscape of moving from the sort of the earlier crude henges into the much more sophisticated ones. I know you suggested that possibly it's the other way around, but timber structure then being replaced by earth, which could be the way. But it's a sophistication as you go through.
Yes. The Dronehenge has a combination of features that make it complex compared to the others. Of course, the greatest difficulty with all of this is lack of excavation, lack of carbon dating, so we don't know the answer. And the honest truth is we may never know the answer, I hope we will. And I hope it happens in my lifetime, because I've got a seriously vested interest in it now. I would love to know in particular. One of the things now, because I'm principally a journalist and a writer, I don't have any academic qualification in archaeology. It leaves me with a little bit more freedom to speculate. The only thing is when I speculate, I say I'm speculating. I don't present something as fact if it's not fact. One of the things I've said about the Bóinne landscape is I have absolutely no doubt that the people who were building some of those monuments were well acquainted with the people who are building the monuments in Orkney and in Salisbury Plain, and probably for the passage tombs in Brittany, because they are the closest cognates of what you see in Bóinne. What we have to get our heads around is, first and foremost, this is a maritime culture. These are a people for whom getting into a boat seems to have been almost as routine as it is for you or I to get onto a bus today. And the distribution, of course, of porcelainite axe heads, I'm always saying this, throughout Ireland and Britain and into the continent is an indication of how, interconnected they were, despite what we would assume were barriers to that. And the rivers are very important. The Bann, I presume, is very close to the Giant's Ring.
Is it the Lagan?
It's not the Bann, the Lagan. Yes. Is it like 100 yards away? Is it half a mile? Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I hope that we'll be able to answer some of those questions. And you're right, because when I found Dronehenge and when it came to writing the book about it, one of my good friends, Dr. Conor Brady, the archaeologist, he said, Anthony, you've got to look at these other sites. And he gave me a number of publications and recommended reading. And of course, one of them was Ballinahattie. He said, there's so much here that looks like it's related or copied or, as I say, I love this modern phraseology, copy and paste, It's like, but it's the same with the dugout boats. Dr. Gregory says it's very difficult to ascertain when you just look at a dugout boat, whether it's 200 years old or 5,000 years old, because once you discover the basic form of them, the design changes very little over thousands of years. And it may be the case with the henges that, as you say, maybe it's the opposite of what I think. I'm thinking Dronehenge is a precursor because it's timber, and they realized we could build a permanent version. But the reverse of that could be true, of course, which is, no, we want to build something more complex, And somebody at the time is going, hey, we built this thing up near, of course you can't say near Belfast because it didn't exist at the time. We built this thing way up there, the Giant's Ring, and this is what we did. And I think that they learned lessons. I've recently published a podcast. I'm treading on thin ice here, I know. I've suggested that Fourknocks might be older than Newgrange. Fourknocks has the largest chamber of any excavated passage tomb, and the roof collapsed while the monument was in use, and no effort was made to rebuild the roof. No passage tomb was built with a chamber that size again. And my theory is because they learned the lesson. It was too wide a space to build a corbelled roof over. It was too much of an engineering challenge. Therefore, we're not going to do that again. And it may well be the case that people who were involved in the creation of these other monumental landscapes, almost certainly, I don't think there's really, it's speculative, I know, but how can there be any doubt when you see the similarities? How can there be any doubt that the people at Bóinne in the late Neolithic and the people at Ballinahattie are communicating, if not some of them are part of a work team that's traveling between one and the other? Quite possible.
Yes.
Sorry,
Don't apologise. I'm enjoying this.
you think about Archaeology. Let me say that.
A little bit more than I do then.
Those long boats, I always think of them, they had to be metal. Is there a suggestion in those pictures that there was a seal? Something,
No, not a sail, but in terms of the first one, there's
What's that lying on top of it?
that's just believe it or not, it's just a piece of sack. It's some sort of coal sack or something. I think it was that one, not that one. It was an indication of a hole in one end of it. And Dr. Gregory, in a talk, which I think might be on YouTube somewhere, he talked about a simple fishing boat where there was a rod that held a sort of an oil lamp, and that the fishing was done at night, and the fish would be what you would call sedate, you know, they'd just be lazy in the river, but that the light, they'd be drawn to the light. But no, nothing in terms of a sail. Dr. Gregory's thoughts about this one in particular was that this was a simple ferry boat, or it might have been, before bridges, or, you know, possibly to ferry people from one side of the River Boyne to the other, you know. Don't pay the ferryman and all of that, you know. A bigger question relates to the larger ones. There was a Neolithic boat, dugout boat, found very close to the M1 motorway bridge, just west of Drogheda. In 2016, a group of anglers found a dugout boat, pulled it out of the river, and it was one of those where the archaeologists did actually send a sample of it away, got a date, it's Neolithic. One of the questions would be, well, there's several questions. One of them would be, are these just riverine boats, or is it possible these were even seaworthy? I don't think so. And another really intriguing possibility, it's long been said that the curbstones of Newgrange, all the big stones of Newgrange, came from Clogher Head. And there's been a long-running debate. Were they dragged across land, which is very difficult, across the terrain and across streams and rivers? Or were they put in a boat and brought down along the coast and up the river? And that's the favoured theory. Dr. Geraldine Stout and Matthew Stout, in their book about Newgrange, suggest that they were tied to the underneath of a barge. But if you've got the right size dugout boat, that would carry a 3-ton slab of greywacke, which is an experiment I'd love to see replicated. You know, I think they did something like that for the Bluestones at Stonehenge, didn't they, years ago? They tried to bring one by boat, and it capsized, and the stones. Oh yeah, that's fascinating. And it's a little bit of an aside, but there's a man in the Bóinne Valley close to Newgrange, Clive Gibney, and he continues to make the old coracles or corrocks, the old cowskin covered boats. And he sailed up and down that river for decades, and he has told archaeologists and me and others there are several what he calls dropped curbstones in the bed of the Bóinne. They look like those Newgrange size slabs of greywacke. But I'd love to see a dugout boat being built in the modern era. Let's make one like they would have made them and see if we can get a Newgrange size curbstone into it and see how far we get with it, you know.
Do we have any more line? Oh,
Did you give you an indication of what wood species?
Oh. Yes, and I can't remember.
Lime.
I can't remember. I'd be able to find out very quickly, but not right here and now. Like when I go home. I can't remember what wood. I don't think it was oak, but it could have been. No. Yeah. Oh. That's a detail now. It's just completely out of my head. I wonder if we'll take a phone call when we're finished. Yeah, no, I can't remember.
any more questions quickly? Nope. Well, in that case, it leaves me just to say another huge thank you to Anthony for coming all the way up from Drogheda to speak to us this evening. It really has been a wonderful talk, and the River Boyne certainly is an area that is a gift that keeps on giving. So anyway, I'd just like to thank you for coming to see us,
Thank you.
and hope we'll hear more in the future. You'll come and see us again sometime.
I'd be delighted to. Yeah.
Fantastic. So just another sign of appreciation from us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Right, everybody, that's our last lecture for 2025. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for those listening in online. And it really just remains me to say season's greetings to you all. I hope you all have a great celebration, whatever you get up to over the next few weeks. And we'll see you in the new year. We have a lecture the last Monday of January with Dr. Paddy Gleeson, talking about kingship and so on. So we'll look forward to seeing you there. And hopefully then we'll be back in our usual venue across the road in the Elmwood building. So Merry Christmas to you all and see you all soon. Thank you.
Hard to believe.
Yes, very well, thank you.
Yes. If anybody's looking for to buy any of Anthony's books, make a great Christmas present. So just up at the back of the lecture theatre here. Anthony's just heading up there now if anybody's interested in buying themselves a wee present for Christmas. I'm certainly going to have a wee look. Thanks.